Bob Bob Bob. Rob Bob Bob. Rob Bob Bob. Yeah, Bob 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 Bob. Bobby D. Bobby Dylan. Bobby Darin. Bobby Dylan. Bob Dylan. Bob Darin. Two figures of the 1960s. This is a show about Sonic the Hedgehog, not Bob Dylan or Bobby Darin. Hey, welcome back to the show that's solely on a new city. That's how we go into every show, and I'm Grant. Hello, hello. And with me is Bo. Hi, Bo.
Here we go, buddy. We are here to ask the question, has Bob Dylan played a Sonic game? Any game, mobile game, Game Gear game?
I can't get enough of that Sonic Unleashed. I love when it goes werehog.
I don't know if that's the Bob Dylan voice, but answering if it is the Bob Dylan voice is the Bob Dylan expert of the show from Sonic Retro, the star, David the Lurker. Hi, David.
Oh, hi, Grant. Hi, Bo. That's right. I listened to Highway 61 Revisited once or twice back in the day. Whoa. Yeah, you know that there's a little Bob Dylan story, right? Where the one time he went out and he's like, I'm gonna play like a Rolling Stone on my electric guitar, and then everyone booed him.
That's right.
And then years later, it was like, yeah, that probably didn't actually happen, but everyone just assumed it happened, and we'll just keep on pretending it happened because it's such a good story. Well,
and
that's
going to be
probably
in the movie because there's the trailer for the
booing,
the Timothy Chalamet Bob Dylan movie, and they make it seem like it was the cause for all civil unrest in the 1960s was Dylan going electric. They make it seem like it was not only did it happen, but it was a huge flipping deal.
Right. I think that's probably what actually happened. Was he went on stage, started playing Sonic 2, and they were like, "What are you doing? We're here to listen to music, not watch a Let's Play," because Let's Plays hadn't been invented yet in the 1960s.
This one may not be for you, but your kids are gonna love it.
That's Bob Dylan as Marty McFly in this Back to the Future plot of having Sonic 2 in the 1960s to an audience that wouldn't yet appreciate it. If you're just joining us, welcome to Sonic Weekly. It's minute 2 of the show, and we have a great guest this week. He is a narrative designer in the world of video games. He's a comedian. He's a raconteur of creative endeavors, I would say. His name is Geoffrey Golden, and we're happy to have him. Hi, Geoffrey.
Hello, Grant. Hello, everybody. If this show was about Bob Dylan, my dad would actually listen. And if the show was about Bobby Darin, my mom would actually listen. But because it's about Sonic, neither of them will listen.
Probably best for all involved.
That is probably the best. But we improvisationally crafted the perfect episode for your parents to
ignore,
almost listen to. Yeah. to like reach out to them.
Tantalize. This is a bridge that will not be built to the boomer generation.
Well, they might be listening up until this point, but I wonder when we'll lose them. We'll know. I feel like they would be like, "Oh, you talk about us in the show, and you talk about Bob Dylan and Bob Darin." Yeah, in fact, we do it in the first 5 minutes. I could give it for the first 5 minutes, and they might listen up until this very moment.
Once you started talking about the Mean Bean Machine, I tuned out. I'll be honest, Geoffrey.
Yeah, that's when we're gonna lose your parents.
Let's drive them away. Let's hear about Geoffrey and his what he's working on and his experience with Sonic. Because if you Google you're not the gospel singer.
No, that is good point. There is another Geoffrey Golden. He is a famous BET gospel singer, but I'm older than he is, so I got the domain geoffreygolden.com. However, that said, our email addresses are very similar, and I often get his email by accident. So sometimes I'll be invited to like perform at a church in Georgia. And there have been times when I've thought about showing up, like just to see what would happen. I can't sing. I don't know any gospel songs by heart. But I can wing it. I can entertain a crowd.
You have legal identification that proves you are Geoffrey Golden, so they can't be upset.
That's right. Legally speaking, I am the guy. You emailed me, Geoffrey Golden.
You're not an imposter. You are exactly the genuine article of who you say you are. And if they don't like that, then that's hurtful.
You're the true double G.
They can pay me to leave. That's the scheme. Pay me to leave.
Going from church to church. That's when they. Oh no, I can't think of the name. Where they're like, "Here's a plate, put money in it. We're passing it around."
Collection.
Collection.
The collection
Yeah.
plate.
Yeah.
This tells you how often I've been to church.
Funny, I knew that. I'm Jewish, and yet I knew that it was a collection
you knew
plate.
it, right? Oh, geez.
Okay, so you don't sing gospel, but you do other things. So what are those things?
I do. So I am a narrative designer and game writer. I've been in the business for over 15 years. I've written for Ubisoft, Capcom, Square Enix, Disney, and indie studios around the world. I am currently working on a VR game called Clone Drone in the Hyperdome, which is the sequel to a popular indie game called Clone Drone in the Danger Zone.
Amazing names.
And those are all real titles of real games. And so I've been the narrative lead on that. And I write a newsletter called Equip Story. And it's about the creative process. So I just finished rattling off credits. Just finished rattling off studios that have hired me for professional work. And for a long time, I thought that my creative work only had value if there was a studio name attached to it. If it was some character, some brand, some IP that somebody had heard of. And Equip Story is it's a devlog, but it's also very personal, creative journey about me falling in love with my own creative process and figuring out the projects that I want to make just because they're fun to make. And it's not easy for me. I grew up, we were talking about my mom and dad. I grew up in a household of professional creatives. My mom's a professional actress. My dad wrote plays and did movie reviews and things. My sister.
Can we say this about your mom?
Producer.
One of the trivia points that I know about your mom's acting career.
Yeah, do it.
I hope I'm right. I hope
you are too, or else we've lost her twice. We've double lost her.
What if I'm like, she was Mrs. Belvedere, and it was like there wasn't even a character in it. No, she's Mrs. Claus, right? In the Macy's Thanksgiving.
She was for many years the longest reigning Mrs. Claus in Macy's history. So if you up until last year, I think she didn't do it last year, but for years and years she did it. And
did she witness the sonic balloon attacking people in 1983?
No. She doesn't go back that far, but far over a decade.
So she would have seen modern Sonic floating around New York City.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
She wouldn't have known who that was. If you were like, Mom, who is that balloon of? She would be like, I don't know. Is it one of Mario's friends? And she wouldn't have been wrong exactly with that guess these days.
Right.
So
sure, they are friendly.
She'd say that's the mascot of that Bobby Darin podcast I love so much.
Right, that's right.
Under the blue sea.
And it's funny, by the way, very funny coincidence that you mentioned Mr. Belvedere, because my mom was actually friends in college with the actress who played the wife on Mr. Belvedere.
Wow.
So Eileen Graff. So there you go. Picked a crazy, that was a crazy specific. You could have picked any 1970s, 1980s credit, and you chose one that my mom actually has a connection to.
And I gotta tell you too, at the beginning of the show, sometimes I will skibbity bop scat, but very rarely am I name dropping anybody specific. Rarely is it words, but for it to be Bobby Darin and Bob Dylan, I don't know. It feels like I'm winning the lottery, but just with specific pop culture references that your mom would appreciate, but we'll never hear.
Did your mom know Bob Dylan? Did your mother date Bob Dylan at one point?
No, she would say this would be her answer to that question, because Bob Dylan was in Woodstock. He was hanging with that crew. My mom was at a rehearsal. That's what she would say. So it's like, Mom, did you do any of the things in the 60s that people in the 60s were known for doing? And she would say, no, I was in a rehearsal the whole time. So
entertaining the masses. What?
That's it.
Oh, was she in what was she rehearsing? I'm sorry, we're just turning this about your mother. But...
No, by all means, let's do it. This is it's like a free therapy session. You were saying earlier that you were hoping to get sponsorship for the show. Maybe BetterHelp could be a sponsor after today's episode. My mom appeared in a number of plays. She's done a lot of musical theater and regular theater over the years, particularly in Buffalo, where I grew up and where she currently lives. But she was in a show called My Name is Alice for a long time. And boy, if that title doesn't completely to get your Sonic fans to a feminist, an 80s feminist series of monologues that was sort of kind of like a funnier version of the vagina monologues. You could maybe you could imagine Amy Rose doing some of it. The Bat Lady does some of it.
Rouge the Bat.
Mm-hmm. Just imagine
I appreciate
that.
You're trying to connect it.
I am trying.
You're doing more than we are at the moment.
I'm doing my best.
So with all our guests, we try to calibrate how deep are you in it? And one way of assessing that is you're Geoffrey. Are you a Geoffrey St. John? Does that mean anything to you, positive or negative?
Is that a reference to the Archie Comics, to the Sonic Archie Comics?
Yes. Ding, ding, ding.
Yes,
okay, great.
Wait, but continue. How specific can you get?
Right.
You're right so far. You're in the first outer circle of hell.
Okay, great. The gentleman who wrote those comics has famously came away with the rights to the minor characters from the Sonic universe that he created for the comics. I've written a lot of IP
Mm-hmm.
comics. So I've written Disney Princess and Casper and Sesame Street. And I'll tell you that in those agreements are generally pretty airtight when it comes to the rights to the characters. So how he managed to take a piece of the Sonic universe with him is pretty remarkable. Now, I also understand that the comics directly reference the Holocaust or imply that there is an equivalent Holocaust in the Sonic universe.
Right. In the beginning.
Sir, yes, you are quite into it.
So on the one hand,
more than
okay, great. So on the one hand, I think of this writer whose name I do not know as a working class hero among creatives who managed to stick it to a big corporation and grab a little piece for himself. And on the other hand, I hate him for belittling the Holocaust. So it's I've got real mixed feelings about that guy.
You've perfectly captured the duality of Ken Penders.
Pender.
Right.
Genius writer who shepherded us into adulthood with his writing and references to all these real world topics through the medium of our beloved childhood character, or crazy insane person who benefited from Archie Comics having the worst lawyers in history.
That's that one.
Who can know?
Yeah.
Also, your vision of him as a Bruce Springsteen character, Ken Penders, is not terribly inaccurate because he's also from your hometown and mine, Buffalo, New York.
He's from Buffalo.
He's a Bills fan. Ken Penders is with
an S.
With an S.
Put an S on
yes, in
that.
fact, we recently loosely read, skimmed, flipped through every page of his new spin-off work. His creator-owned omnibus of the Lara Sue Chronicles, where the Echidna, some of its reprints of the Knuckles in the future storylines, where he's got like a cybernetic eye, and then it continues into this thing where it's like a cosmic event happens where essentially a narrator comes in and says, from this point forward, the characters are now legally distinct. Knuckles is Nox, the Echidna instead of Knuckles the Echidna.
Right.
And like so forth.
Sonic doesn't exist.
Hold on.
He's never
Hold
existed.
on.
Sonic.
Wait.
Yes.
Time out, says Zach Morris.
Okay.
Are you saying that he, in addition to owning, because I understand that Ken Penders would own like original characters that he created for the comics. Are you saying he also owns a version of Knuckles? Like there is a version of Knuckles that he can like legally use? Because that is amazing.
Right. It is a he made the
Oh my
argument.
God.
There it is. Yes. The listeners can't see, but Grant is holding.
I'll try to describe what I'm looking at.
Yes.
It's like Sonic the Hedgehog drawn as like fan art, like a person who has been drawing fan art for like a long time.
Yeah.
Drawing like Sonic the Hedgehog characters against what was like a real background. Like I think it was like an actual sunset, like a photo sunset, which is, by the way, something I love. Fumetti. I love photo comics. I think those are awesome. And yeah, I'm pretty sure I did see a version of Knuckles. Yeah, that is definitely Knuckles.
Yeah.
Oh shit. Okay.
Knox is his new name. But I guess the closest analog is
amazing.
You know how a few years back there was a period of time where DC could not use the name Superboy, and they couldn't depict like Clark as a teenager and call him that for
right, because
once upon a time, like Jerry Siegel pitched it and DC went nah, and then they published it anyway because he was off at war. And so there was like this weird legal distinction between Superman and Superboy, even though they were technically the same character. And I think like that's sort of Ken's main driving point is like, this is Knuckles from the future, so he's a different Knuckles than the Knuckles that everyone else knows.
Again, if he hadn't belittled the Holocaust, I would be on his side. Bills fan from Buffalo.
Right.
Oh, took it to Archie Comics.
Well,
this guy sounds great.
Well,
Love this guy.
What he did is, that, I can't think of the actual, like, who wrote it. It's that very famous poem of, like, first they came for the communists, but I didn't say anything because I wasn't a communist. He took that poem and changed it. He did a pastiche or whatever, where he changed the references to real world and made it about, first they came for the hedgehogs, but I didn't say anything because I wasn't a hedgehog. Right. It's just called First They Came. That's the name of the poem. So he just, changed it, even though it didn't match the history of the comic itself. Like all the backstory that he had helped create doesn't match what he did with that poem. So it just feels like a big waste of time anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I could defend it though.
Yeah.
Me
at that age did not know the original reference.
No.
And it's presented in the comic as totally straight. Like, this is some serious shit that's happening right here.
Right.
And then, when I learn about it in history class, whatever year that was, I have like the warm introduction to it. And also I'm a little horrified.
All right.
Because it is a story arc about fascism, and Knuckles has to stop fascism from happening on the floating island.
Okay. All right. It sounds like it was less offensive and more just bad.
Yes, I was going to say that in defense of it, he has bad taste overall. Like,
Got it.
This is not the lone example of like a pretty bad creative choice.
Right.
But,
okay. Got it.
Kind of like what Bo's saying, like his heart's in the right place. He's not trying to belittle the Holocaust. He's trying to.
No, he takes it all deadly seriously.
Yeah.
He's creating metaphor. He's using just Sonic as a way to approach deeper subject matter.
Yeah.
I mean, he infused his personal narratives into it as well. Like he explores the relationship that he has with his father.
So many times
with Knuckles and his father Locke, and Locke passes away, and Ken in a later interview is like, this was me dealing with my father's death.
Wait, does he own Knuckles? Did he create
Does he
Knuckles,
own Knuckles' dad? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
Which means in some ways, yeah.
In some ways, his father lives on forever.
Oh, I was going to say in some ways he owns his father.
Right.
Yeah, wow. Damn.
That's the best thing he owns. Has he properly exploited Knuckles' dad? Because that is off. That is so funny.
He had so many Knuckles grandpas too, because like the
Right.
joke of like the Knuckles canon that he created was just like he kept adding wrinkles and beards and goatees to the Knuckles face and called it a distinct character.
Oh yeah, I mean he's the Karl Barks to the Scrooge comics. He's created the whole Duck universe, like the whole Duck universe. He's created a whole Knuckles universe.
I also think that naming Knuckles' father Locke is a direct reference to the philosopher Locke, and he takes that also very seriously. Like, I'm drawing the parallel.
Yeah.
My father, Ken Penders Senior, is John Locke.
That's
okay. Well, I love that.
Right.
Okay, this is great.
Yes.
Thank you for. So the answer is, I knew more than most, but not as much as some.
right.
Which is generally speaking where I am with various which is where I usually am with pop culture.
Right. Well, I guess to talk about, right, so you're not super familiar with the Archie work, which is fine. So what is your personal relationship with Sonic? When did you first discover the character? Were you into Sonic? Were you like, oh, whatever, that's cool, but I really love Mario more? Or like, what is Sonic to you, I guess, is sort of what it boils down to.
Absolutely. The first time I experienced Sonic was at my friend John's house at a sleepover. I didn't have a game station. I didn't have a console of my own until Game Boy came out, and I would have been about 10 or 11. But John had a Sega Genesis in his furnished basement, and
furnished.
It was a finished basement. Furnished. It was furnished and fit. It was finished and furnished. Yeah,
wood paneling.
Double thread.
Yes.
Did it have a bar? Because a lot of basements.
It did have a bar. Now that you mentioned it, yeah, but it was empty. It had nothing on it because I think kids were using it. So they probably filled the bar for parties, or maybe they used to use the bar before they had kids,
right? And
then they had to get rid of all the alcohol. But it did have a freezer underneath it where they kept ice pops, and so in the summer they had basically unlimited ice pops. And he had a pinball game. And yeah, they were doing pretty well. They were doing better than we were. Let me put it that way. And he had a Sega Genesis, and I was very much ensconced in the Nintendo universe and family of products. And if you were like, Geoffrey, you need to pick a side on the playground, Nintendo or Sega, I would have been firmly on the Nintendo side. Now, but this is all to say, I did enjoy playing Sega. Like, I did like it. But I felt like it was too cool for me. Like, Sega Genesis read to me as like the older brother's console. Like,
totally, yes.
This is what like cool kids play. Like, you're hanging out in the back of a 7-Eleven smoking a cigarette. Like, you probably play Sega Genesis.
Right.
Like, and that was not me at all. I wore Space Jam sweatshirts in high school. I was photographed in a Space Jam sweatshirt in the newspaper, in which I had a column in the local paper, in the Buffalo News. I had a column in the kids section where I reviewed shareware games. I was not cool.
Wow.
I reviewed Macintosh shareware, the school in the Buffalo newspaper. Wow. Yeah.
I did not know that.
So I felt Nintendo was very accessible to me. it felt like it was on my wavelength. It wasn't too cool. And I just love Mario. I have always played. I played every mainline Mario game, but I'm very spotty on the Sonic games. I certainly have not played every mainline Sonic game. But I have played a number of Sonic games over the years. And I generally like them. As long as they're like 2D and the game is about speedy platforming, I will usually get into it. I'm usually for it. So yeah, my connection with Sonic, I have sort of a vague other connection with Sonic, which is that for a year, I worked for the studio that makes the Sonic the Hedgehog movies. So they're a mixed movie and game studio, and I worked on the game side. But the Sonic movies were how they stay afloat. And I worked on a Borderlands game that may come out at some point. Who knows? But anyway, I did it. Oh. And so I would tell people the studio I work for made the Sonic the Hedgehog movies. And they were like, oh, are you working on a Sonic the Hedgehog game? And I would have to say, no, I guess they have no other credits you would know. But I need to say that in order to ground this conversation, it's something you are aware of. But no. But I felt close, like I was almost working with Sonic. My other almost Sonic connection, you explored in a recent episode, Grant, with Eric Barnes, our mutual friend, who talked about working for Michael Kosaka. The three of us all worked for Michael Kosaka at that trivia game, and he was an incredible boss, and he worked on an unreleased Sonic game. And y'all talked about that before, though. We don't need to tread old ground,
right?
But I'm going to claim that as another almost Sonic connection for myself.
Yeah, it counts.
Great.
I think so. It seems like the last Sonic game that you've played would have been, I'm going to take a guess, Sonic Mania?
Or I did play Sonic Mania, yes.
Did you play Sonic Frontiers or Superstars or?
No.
No, that's okay.
But I played Sonic Mania, for sure.
Did you like Sonic Mania?
At first I was confused because the game felt so similar to the original Sonic games that I mistakenly thought it was like a retro collection, that it was some kind of like remix game. Admittedly, if you're like Geoffrey, which retro platformer character who is largely blue do you have the most affection for? I would say Mega Man. Mega Man is
you are a huge Mega Man fan.
I'm a huge Mega Man fan. Mega Man's
a Quip Story being the name of your newsletter would also be a hint.
My Mega Man
earlier.
amiibo. Here's my replica Mega Man arcade cabinet, which is kind of an anachronism because he's not an arcade guy. There are Mega Man arcade games, everybody, but they're not but the original Mega Man games, which is what this has, the Nintendo was. Although actually I do think that one of the Mega Man games was a Play Choice 10 game. So it's possible that one of the NES Mega Man games was on, but it wouldn't have been late. The marquee wouldn't have said Mega Man. It would have said Play Choice 10, everybody. Anyway, I've gotten way off topic.
If that was the Power Battles, that would make more.
Right. Thank you. Yes. Oh, the Wily. Exactly. So
where I'm going with this is
where are
you going with this?
Yeah. Where I'm going with this is I thought Sonic Mania may have been like one of the thousands of Mega Man collections that have come out instead of new Mega Man games.
Sure.
We get like every
not
year,
1,000 miles away.
Every year we get like Capcom presents the same 8 games over again. And it's like, God damn it, Capcom. Anyway, that's what I mistakenly thought Sonic Mania was. And then my friend explained, no, it is actually a new game. And then I went back and played it, and I enjoyed it. So yes, I did enjoy
the first
it.
two
Thought it was
levels
great.
are throwback levels, kept Green Hill and then Chemical Plant. And then third level, Studiopolis.
Brand new.
It's like, oh, this is brand new.
Yeah.
This
That
is a
was the
new
thing.
idea.
I didn't stick with it. If I had stuck with it a little longer in my first playthrough, I would have realized that it was like. Do you remember that? Do you remember that Game Boy Donkey Kong game where at first the first like 3 levels it's just like Donkey Kong, and then all of a sudden it becomes like a puzzle game where it's like Mario is like has to capture capture Pauline, but you have to go through a bunch of traps and stuff like that. And
Modern Pauline, that's her origin, isn't it? That's Donkey Kong 94? I believe?
That's Donkey Kong 94. Yeah, good work. Yes, and
origin of the tie, the necktie.
Yeah.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So so it seems like you prefer what would be known as classic Sonic, right?
Yes.
You don't necessarily prefer the 3D games as much.
No, and in fact, I have trouble with 3D games in general. They often make me nauseous. Particularly 3D games where you move the camera. If you don't move the camera, it's fine. If it's just like 3D graphics, like Mario Galaxy, no problem. Like it's just you just hop from one thing to another. The camera adjusts automatically, and I'm great. But if I have to adjust the camera, I get deathly ill. And I think a lot of the 3D Sonic games are in that style.
Yeah.
And so I don't play them.
The camera can be a little wild. Especially depending on the title, certainly. But Sonic's never been known for having a good camera in the 3D sphere. Yeah. Okay. So you're a classic man.
Yes.
Well, if Mega Man is your big thing, did you ever indulge in the Sonic Mega Man comic crossovers, or were you?
Okay, I did read the first issue of it.
Okay,
and here's the thing: everything I've heard about Sonic comics is like, oh boy, like this is a whole thing. I did try to get into the Archie Mega Man comics. I don't know. It just they didn't do it for me. It felt, and I tried that crossover. It just felt a lot like the 90s Saturday morning cartoon, which is usually a thing that I say to praise it, to praise a property. And in this case, I'm saying it. I'm very particular about Mega Man.
Okay.
I don't think Mega Man has ever really been adapted well, except for the Mega Man X. The anime.
Oh yeah,
that's very good. The Mega Man manga is great. The I don't remember the name of the person, the mangaka who does it, but it's fantastic because it is insane. The art is like crazy. It's like super distorted and wild and weird. It's really fun. My thing with Mega Man in terms of adapting it as a story is that the video games present this world where the bosses all have their own like zones. It's like, it's not just that I'm like on the street and like there's Crash Man. Like, oh, I was going to the ATM and Crash Man like was like, screw you, Mega Man, bam. They live in like a whole like techno fantasy, death zone. And but yet all the Mega Man properties seem to take place in like a modern day metropolis, like a standard city. And so I just don't vibe with that. Like, I feel like Mega Man is like it's like a Kamen Rider meets cyberpunk kind of a thing. Like, not like Superman, but he's a boy robot kind of a thing, So anyway, that's I guess you got off on a rant here.
That's all right.
It ties into where we're looking ahead, which is part of the appeal for Mega Man. It seems clear to me. It's not just the gameplay, but also the world, the narrative, and the characters. And so, in a way, I'm almost a little surprised that Sonic didn't resonate with you more as a kid or just in general, because I can see that not being as into the gameplay maybe, but Sonic, don't you think, has more of like a story than Mario does? but I think sometimes to its detriment, because like the comics, as you've mentioned, like I think it can be off-putting to people. But was that the case with you, where you were like, oh, this is too much story, or it was like just irrelevant, or
it's a great.
How did the story strike you? Because also when we were kids too, now there's a much more unified canon, but there was the Adventures of cartoon, there was a Saturday morning cartoon, so there was a lot of different interpretations of what the Sonic story was as well.
Yes, great question. The thing about me with story and games is that I generally either like my games to have an incredible, well-defined story or no story at all.
Gotcha.
So an example of a game whose story I really loved growing up as a kid was Final Fantasy IV, which has a story that's so good they've remade it in like modern day. They've remade it like multiple times. Now everybody loves Final Fantasy VII the best, and that's fine. I'm not going to argue that Final Fantasy IV is better than Final Fantasy VII. I'm just going to say Final Fantasy IV means more to me because it was a game that inspired me to love stories and video games. Anyway, when I was a kid, Mario has a very simple story. And I think that's what I like about it, that it's just basically like Alice in Wonderland. Like, you can get behind it. They're plumbers. They fall down a drain pipe. They're here to protect a princess. Now, the princess gets kidnapped. You're done. You're in and you're out. It's elegant. In fact, when they did try to expand Mario's story into a feature-length film, I hated it. I hated the Mario movie. It didn't feel like Mario at all. And the reason was because they got the guys who did Max Headroom to make it. And I was so surprised.
You meant the live action movie.
The live action movie, yeah.
The recent movie, too.
The recent movie, I think is pretty good. I mean, it's not great. It's beautifully animated.
Yeah,
wonderfully animated.
Gorgeous.
Maybe gorgeously animated. It has some fun set pieces, has a great voice cast. There's a lot to like about the movie. Maybe the story is a little rickety, but there's a lot to like about the Mario movie, I think. Whereas with Sonic's mythology, I think there were just things that like tripped me up. Like the idea of like capturing the animals into like robot shells, but then I hit the shell, and then it like frees a bunch of rabbits and stuff, and it's like it never like I understood it. It just like visually, I just didn't grok. Like I didn't grok it. Like a lot of the elements felt disparate to me. Like Sonic lives in like a world that doesn't always feel as cool as he is. Like there are elements of it that are always cool, like the loop-de-loops. Like, okay, like he's doing loop-de-loops. That is cool. But like oftentimes he was like presented in scenarios, I don't know, that just felt like what is this guy doing? Like, what is Sonic doing here? I don't know. Like it just felt like he should be like he has this look about him and this attitude about him that made me feel like, oh, this guy should be, again, at the back of the 7-Eleven, like smoking with cool kids. So I don't know. Anyway, it never fully came together for me. And then the more I learned about Sonic's backstory, the more I got confused. As opposed to Mario, whose story never changes. And therefore, I could just focus on the simple gameplay, and I could just enjoy the elegance of and perfection of the gameplay. As opposed to having in my head, like, who are all these characters? Who is Rouge? How is he? Who is Abbey Rose?
Right.
Who are these people?
It's an ongoing question from the beginning. In 1991, in the first Sonic level, why are some of the animals different than Sonic? And are there more humans than Eggman Robotnik?
Right.
And to this day, that's not the answer to that is not entirely clear. It really depends who you ask, which media you're talking about.
Right.
and so forth.
Right.
Because
So,
in the movies, there are a lot of humans.
Yeah,
Sonic's an alien.
that's right.
They're
And then
mostly humans.
And then in the Archie comic, there was a period where it was like, oh yeah, like Robotnik is an overlander, which is different from a human because they have 4 fingers instead of 5, but there are also humans. The reason being, of course, that Mobius was Earth, and an alien race called the Zorda showed up and dropped a bunch of gene bombs, which devolved all life on Earth, except for a handful of humans that were protected in places like hollowed out mountains.
But of course, that's the Archie canon.
That's the Archie
in the
canon.
IDW canon, it's maybe that Eggman is the alien because it's an all-animal world.
Right. Or that the humans are just hanging out on the continents and animals are on islands, which...
Regardless, to your point, there's a lot of
There's a lot,
elements.
yes.
And Sonic dates a hot human lady in one game, right?
Yeah.
As we like to point out, not just
goes
once.
back to that well a couple times.
Multiple ladies.
Well,
Great.
right. The original concept of Sonic, the concept art has a character called Madonna. She's, she's blonde. She's got a red dress. She's probably based on Madonna, the pop singer, because her name's Madonna.
Sure.
Created because Naoto Oshima, who created Sonic, wanted everyone to know that he was an adult, not a kid. And a kid wouldn't date a human lady, but an adult definitely would date a human lady.
Yeah. This is definitely, there is definitely a trope where cartoon animals always find human women sexy. They either date like a hot human woman or they date a clone of themselves with a bow on her head. It's like those are your two dating options. Those are like the two dating options for these characters.
Sonic World goes with why not both?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Exactly. That's brave. That's brave choice. Brave creative choice. I like that.
And he continues forever. Sonic he likes to keep his options open.
So this is a natural segue to the news.
Oh,
of
yeah, it is.
the
Right.
week.
Right. There's not a
40 minutes into the show because there's not a lot of news. The true news is that we're days away from the launch of Sonic X Shadow Generations that we've been anticipating for a long time. The full anime shorts of the Dark Beginnings 1, 2, and 3 have been compiled together on YouTube. That's exciting. You can get hyped with the prologue. There's definitely going to be a lot of story. And as we were talking about the last couple of episodes, it was hard sometimes even for big fans to follow. We were corrected later by listeners and also just by rewatching. I'm like, oh, okay, I see what the was saying. But nevertheless, the point was if you were kind of casually watching, there's just a lot of story.
Yeah, and maybe to catch our guest up. Okay, so Sonic Generations comes out 2011.
Okay.
It's got its own story. It's a time travel story. And they're bringing it back, remaster, new graphics, modern systems, but they're tacking on a mini game to it that stars another character, Shadow. I don't know if you're Shadow pilled.
I am reasonably shadow pilled. I have seen I certainly have seen Shadow. I know Shadow has been in many of the games. I know Shadow is in the movies, in the new movie coming out.
Yes.
This is the year of Shadow.
This is the year of Shadow. Great. I remember. Listen, I partied hard for the year of Luigi. I got blitzed out for the year of Luigi. So I can only imagine what kind of hijinks and shenanigans y'all are up to for the year of Shadow. We've been letting
it all hang out a little bit fearlessly, as you might think with Shadow. So Sonic Generations, did you play that one? That's a time travel, as Bo said, it's modern Sonic and classic Sonic. So it's like the Genesis side-scrolling Sonic and then the modern 3D boost Sonic meeting each other. That came out in 2011 for the
20th
anniversary. Wow, the 20th anniversary. And then now it's coming out again, remastered, but with this additional, what we thought was a mini game, but they're saying is as long as the main game. So it's just a separate additional game, which is Shadow Generations.
Oh, cool.
And it's kind of like the new jumping on point because it covers the whole series up until now. But it's a lot of story, a lot of lore, I guess.
Does it go back and forth between 2D and 3D gameplay? So you do 2D size, and then you flip to the 3D.
You get the same level twice, once 2D, once 3D.
That's
Act 1, Act 2, yeah. And you can just like play through like, oh, I just want to do the 2D ones for now, so you can just do those continuously.
That's cool.
It's a good game, and it's and really, this might be the highest Metacritic scoring Sonic game since Sonic Mania. I think it's probably going to be an 80 or above an 80.
Hey, that's amazing.
It's unusual.
That is amazing for Sonic. Yes.
I get it. He's had his fair share of strikes. But listen, what is it? You don't hit the balls that you don't swing at, or whatever. I've just mangled that.
Exactly it.
Mangled that.
It's either a good timeout or a terrible timeout, depending on who you ask. I'm excited.
I love that. It's always good when you do a remake, but you're adding something new to it. Mm-hmm. Like there's a reason for it.
The Shadow Generations part is like the Bowser's Fury, it looks like.
That makes total sense.
Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury plus Shadow Generations, or X Shadow Generations. But so I'd like to, I guess, okay, so that's the Sonic news, dear listener. So now jumping back to Geoffrey, but it's still tied to Sonic.
Please.
I don't know much about what a narrative designer does for a video game. And I don't know how much that interacts with or is distinct from or connected to what it means to write a video game.
Yeah.
But I have been noticing that a lot of people on Twitter who have not held those jobs seem to know an awful lot about it. So I'd be curious just to know what it is actually like from your experience of, how much is given to you of like, hey, we just need somebody to fill in like this amount of dialogue boxes versus like, we need somebody to help shape what this project is.
Yeah.
And does that go from project to project, or how has it been for you?
Yeah. And by the way, X, just so many great experts on that platform, like a really reliable source of information. So, for me, I introduced myself, I am both a narrative designer and a game writer, and they're two different jobs. So Grant, you sort of ran the gamut in an interesting way. So a game writer is, generally speaking, somebody who writes dialogue, somebody who maybe writes character backstories, like who does like traditional like screenwriting type jobs, but for video games. Maybe they'll also write like UI text, like, oh, they're items, so like what are the item descriptions? Like a game writer will write that. And a narrative designer figures out how the player will interact with story. And often that means designing systems and overviews and things. It's sort of it's a very much like a concepting position. Now, oftentimes at a studio, they hire me as a narrative lead, which means I'm doing both jobs because I'm a department of one. Even on bigger games, generally speaking, they hire one narrative person to do all the jobs. But in bigger studios, they're distinct positions. And so the way I explain it is, the narrative designer says, okay, we're in a cyberpunk world. We're gonna tell the lore through graffiti on the wall. So the player is going to go through, and they're going to see different graffiti from different groups, different gangs, depending on where they are in the cyberpunk city. And then they'll make a list of like, here's the graffiti we need in the different locations with the different characters. And then they'll say to the game writer, please write the tags. Please write the actual graffiti. So the narrative designer's job was to come up with a document and to pitch that document, that vision, to the creative director and say, here's how we're going to tell the story. And then the game writer executes the dialogue and executes those elements. But as you say, I often do both. So yeah, that is plainly speaking what a narrative designer and a game writer are.
So when it's done well, are you or this position involved earlier on, or like is it worse when it's kind of like an afterthought? How do you, have you been part of both sides of that spectrum?
You bet. I have. So the thing about narrative for games is that there are no set formulas. Every project is different from each other often in fundamental ways. So, for example, when I work on a mobile game, I am often one of the last people to come in. So usually they have done everything. They've done the art, they've constructed the levels, they have the game is basically all set up. They just need somebody to write words for characters to say between match 3 puzzles. And that is a job that usually it's like a month to 3 months or something like that. And I've done that, and very grateful to do that work, and that is a good living for people. And then the other side of it is I have worked on games that have taken multiple years, and I've been at the very beginning of the project. Usually, when that's the case, I'm acting as a narrative designer, and oftentimes it'll be for a role-playing game or for a game that would be text heavy, that would be story heavy, even story driven, where you need somebody to shape the narrative at the very beginning. Because the narrative is often a huge chunk of the game. It's a huge part of the game. But even in those cases, oftentimes the development team will have made what's called a vertical slice prior to me coming on board. So vertical slice, think of it like a demo, but it's very well polished. It's like one level of gameplay that is super well polished. Like there's great art, there's great, the gameplay, game mechanics, no story yet usually, but like a lot of things. And you give that to like a publisher, you pitch it to a publisher and you say, give me the money to finish this. And so usually they will have done that, the vertical slice, and then they'll bring me in after the vertical slice. And so there'll be elements of the story that are already there, but they're just not contextualized. So, for example, the vertical slice features a lead character, and the lead character, they made her an angel because she's flying, because she's going to fly. And it's a platforming game where you fly in and out and you hit objects. It's like a Kid Icarus kind of a vibe, modern day Kid Icarus kind of vibe. Okay, so why is this an angel? Did this character die? But did this character live at one point? Was this character always an angel? Why is the character fighting these goblins? Has heaven been invaded by goblins? And so context is like a huge part of what I do, but not just context like off the top of my head, context that motivates the player to want to play the game. So, context that's motivated, that's tied into the mechanics and how we want the player to feel, right? If we want the player to feel like a sense of dread and doom, that Angel's backstory, the way that Angel's personality and stuff will be very different than if this is like a fun, lighthearted game and sometimes they don't really fully understand, the team doesn't really understand the tone of the game. They made visuals, so there's like an idea of tone, but often my job will be to write a tone style guide and to be like, let me firmly establish, like, this is the type of story that we are clearly telling. Sometimes the dev team will think they're telling a dark story, but you look at the art and you look at like the gameplay and the feel of it, and it's clearly a much lighter story. And I have to have conversations of being like, listen, like we can tell the story as dark as you want, like, but my gut instinct here is that actually this is a much more, family friendly, title than maybe you realize, that you fully appreciate. And we can make changes to make it edgier, but I would hope that the changes, that's the work I do with story, would be reflected in the game mechanics, in the, in the level design, and making the game, generally speaking, if a game is supposed to be grittier, it's probably going to be harder. It's probably going to be more difficult, more of a slog. So you want the player to feel that toughness, to feel that aggression, right, of the world. But if the game is like lighthearted and fun, generally speaking, the difficulty may be less so, and maybe the mechanics are simpler to understand, and you don't really need to tutorialize that much. So anyway, long answer to your simple question is something I'm great at on podcasts.
Great answer.
You mentioned something interesting earlier, which is that video games have less of a formula than some other media. And like one way that I've ruined movies for myself is like I know the save the cat beats.
Right.
It's just every movie I'm like, oh man, we're at that point in the story. But video games don't have that, or
no.
Is there some terrible thing that people have ruined video game stories with yet?
Nope, nothing like that. It is very much still the Wild West. I mean, yeah, like if you're working on a more cinematic game and like the ambitions of the team are to make an interactive movie, and I don't mean like the kind of FMV interactive movies that you would play on Sega CD, which I love, by the way. I'm obsessed with those. But anyway,
yes, can confirm that.
if you're trying to make a Last of Us or something like that, it is like this. My video game is to be taken as seriously as a movie. We often employ movie storytelling tactics, which include, rising action. Acts, a 3-act structure with rising action, and so, and I use those. I like in a project I worked on recently. I used the 3-act structure, but the thing was the second act was recurring. And so you would play through it again and again. So it gave me an interesting opportunity. It's like normally with a 3-act structure, you have just rising tension, right? You have your hero and your rising tension. But because we were in a roguelike with the recurring structure, it was a blast because I could just have the player just explore explore this universe and these characters relationships to each other. And like, yeah, like the action is still rising because we will taunt you and we will, tell you that you did a bad job or whatever, and that you should be working harder to get to the, to defeat the villain or whatever. But there was this opportunity to sort of take our time and do sort of that, which is something you would never do in a movie, And so, So yeah, even when we are employing the techniques of movies, we are often subverting them, changing them, doing our own thing. It is very much a Wild West in terms of what video game storytelling is. And when you think of like the best video game stories, you are thinking of vastly different, storytelling structures, being employed, So yes, luckily there is no save the cat. There is no best practice. It's very much genre dependent. It's very much dependent on the mechanics, because the mechanics are to use the film term, they are the mise en scene. The mechanics are our way in as players. We experience a video game through the mechanics. And so my job as a narrative designer, as a storytelling games, is to tell a story that entices you to want to continue engaging with the mechanics, with those gameplay mechanisms. And that is where I think a lot of video game storytelling goes awry. They throw in a lot of lore, but the lore isn't grounded in the mechanics. So it's like, why am I experiencing this story, these storytelling elements? They feel superfluous to me. They don't engage. They don't give me more reason to engage with the mechanics of the way the game is built. In fact, oftentimes, we have cinematics. We have people love to skip cutscenes, right? It's like, yeah, they love to skip cutscenes because they're not gameplay, because they're here to play a game. And it's like, if the cutscenes are often just an extraneous story that has nothing to do with the gameplay, with what you are doing, they're not grounded. There are tricks that we use to ground a cutscene in gameplay. One thing is make the cutscene about the thing the player just did. If the player just killed a bunch of spies, whatever, don't make the scene just solely about, some backstory with the villain or whatever. Just make it about how cool it was that the player killed all those spies. And wow, player, you've done an amazing thing here today. Anyway, there's a lot of things. There's I could go on. But.
That's awesome. Super insightful too. And there's all sorts of parallels that the listeners can draw to Sonic games themselves. Because we are now pivoting over to the other side of games, which is the bow side. I was going to say the code side, but I don't know if that's really accurate. I don't know enough terminology to really say what Bo does, other than he cracks them open and shows us.
Yeah, I don't really
guts.
play games so much as read their code and then see what things that didn't get finished.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I mentioned last week I'm on a bit of a 3DO kick. I'm trying to alienate as much of my audience as I can.
Oh, I could talk a little bit about the 3D because that system had a lot of FFV games. So
yeah,
very excited. That's very exciting for me that you're diving into 3D.
Yeah, and so I've got a big get for next week, which is I opened up the 3DO game Phoenix 3. This is an exclusive. There's a bunch of 3DO games. A lot of them got ported to the PlayStation or to the Saturn. But Phoenix 3 didn't. It remained locked on the 3DO. And I found inside of this game not only one cheat code that nobody knows about, but another cheat code. You got to put in the first cheat code, then you do the second cheat code. And it comes up with an alternate set of credits. And these are rogue credits. The guy who typed them is just dishing on the people who made the game.
Oh, hilarious.
So, some of it is this guy, stayed up all night and worked on this thing, and these people did a great job on these graphics. But then other parts of it are this guy who, this is really risking my career to talk about because he's the company owner's brother, made me waste a bunch of my time on this one thing here.
I would
very much like finds this.
I'd very much like to read them. That sounds hilarious. I love that. I was literally working on credits for a game today, and so it's very much germane to what I've been thinking about. So yeah, I didn't think to hide secret credits. That's a great that's a great idea.
Well, so I guessed who wrote them because at the end of it ends with what looked to me like either German or Dutch. And there's a guy who's on the programming credits whose name looks pretty German or Dutch. So I found him on LinkedIn.
Oh no!
And I said, shot in the dark. You don't know me, but do you remember working on this game and any Easter eggs you might have left in? And he wrote me back and he said, oh man, that was 30 years ago. No, I don't remember any of it. What are you talking about? And so I sent him the video of the credits and he got a big kick out of it. He wrote me like a little retrospective about the tech and working on the 3DO. And I'm super pleased to run it soon on the blog. And by the time people hear this, it'll be either just out or about to come out.
Either way, subscribe to Rings of Saturn.
Right.
Rings of Saturn, folks.
32bits.substack.
In the 3DO era.
The
3.
3DO. Yes. That sounds fun. All right. Mention FMV games. I got to ask you, Geoffrey.
Yes.
What is your favorite FMV game of that era?
Ooh.
The Sega CD 3DO.
Ooh, that is a tough
because you
choice.
Think Sewer Shark Night Trap. That's
right.
Oh, right.
Right.
And I guess if I own the Night Trap album on vinyl. So that's where I'm at with my fandom. But the worst one is Plumbers Don't Wear Ties.
Right.
And I do love to hate to love that game. It is like a master class in what not to do in game design and choice design. And it's so funny and it's so stupid.
I was just trying to explain this to my dear wife and I showed her a picture of it and she's like, what on earth are you looking at?
I decided to just watch it with my wife. I was like, Amanda, let's just watch the whole gameplay of Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. Because we watch a lot of bad movies. We watch a lot of what we call bonkers movies. And so I was like, as a change of pace, how would you like to see what is often referred to as the worst video game of all time? And she was intrigued. And a great comedian wrote, Limited Run recently re-released the game. It did like an amazing like release of it. And I got the novelization that they did. This comedian, Mike Drucker, very funny comedian, wrote a novelization of Plumbers Don't Wear Ties and like filled in some of the blanks in like ridiculous ways. But also it's mostly just like him just doing commentary on the game in novel form. Which is pretty great. And I really appreciate it. And my wife's mind was like blown by it. She could not believe that like anybody would make it. And for those of you who aren't familiar,
I'm not familiar.
Oh, okay, great, Grant. So FMV games, they stand for full motion video. But Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, it isn't really technically a full motion video for most. Most of it is, I would describe it as still, as a full still photography video.
I see.
Because the game was done in still photographs. And so
it's a choose your own adventure slideshow.
It's a choose your own adventure slideshow about a plumber whose mom is ragging on him for not being married. And he meets a lady in a parking lot and decides in that moment that is like the person that he is going to marry. But she is on her way to a job interview. And so she leaves him heartbroken. That is
a romantic comedy slideshow.
I've got through half of the plot of the game, but the game is like an hour and a half long or something like that, and I just went through like half the plot with you.
Okay,
it is absolutely terrible, but really a delight in its terribleness.
I take the recommendation seriously, so I will check it out.
Prepare
listeners will check out.
Semi-offended.
Okay, we will not link it in the description, but we will link to Geoffrey's newsletter and, of course, website and Bo's Rings of Saturn and so forth in the description below. Geoffrey, thanks for hanging out with us. Super insightful to talk to us about your career and also to just. You knew a lot about Ken Penders. Who knew that?
Yeah.
I didn't know that much about Ken Penders.
Right. You should have lunch with him one day.
We could get a little Buffalo group together.
I do Buffalo time with Ken.
Okay.
If Ken is down, I'm down. And then we can talk about it on the podcast. I'll come back on the podcast and we'll dish on our Buffalo love. We'll get Buffalo. We'll get chicken fingers. Buffalo chicken fingers, and we'll talk about obscure Sonic characters that he owns the rights to. Very exciting.
Like Geoffrey St. John.
That's right.
Sleuth Doggy Dog. And of course, Knuckles' father, Locke.
He's got to exploit that. If he's not exploiting that, he's missing a major opportunity.
That's right.
David, should we rate and review this show?
Oh yeah, that's right. I was just letting our guest finish, but if you want to share a plate of chicken with with Ken Penders, then maybe you should do that while wrapping up another episode of Sonic Weekly. That's right, the podcast that you just listened to once a week, all Sonic, all the time, except when it's not. But that's fine. Yeah, but if you enjoyed what you heard, we've got plenty of guests. We always have guests. They show up. You want to know the best way to listen to the newest episode? That's right. If you subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe with your podcatcher of choice, be it Apple Podcasts, Spotify. If you are devoted to the Android platform, download Podcast Addict. It's the only way to live on an Android phone. You can rate the show, review the show. That helps us out in the algorithmic sense, so more people can hear about Ken Penders. Because I think not enough people have heard about Ken Penders. If you don't want to deal with a podcast catcher at all, we are also over on YouTube. It's at Sonic-Weekly. Like, comment, and subscribe. Those are the 3 words everyone uses, but it's not just audio. It also features gameplay from friend of the show, Jack of Old Games. Hey, you can reach out to the show. We have a mailbag. And to write in, use the email, it's sonicweeklypodcast@gmail.com. Drop us a line. We may read what you send off, but also that's how you get a link to the Discord server. Just say, give us that link, and you can jump right in, talk to like-minded Sonic the Hedgehog fans about all sorts of things, including, that's right, Sonic the Hedgehog. We've also got the Ko-fi running over. It's just called Sonic Weekly. You can, throw in a tip jar, or you can become one of our executive producers, just like Pig Dan, Pabsy, Sonicu, Saving Throws, and, Cal Belgeri. How do you say this? Belgerian? Belgeri? I don't know. We'll just say Cal. Right. You can be just like Cal. Those are our EPs, and you can be an EP too. Hey, and you can get exclusive goodies from wife of the Grant, Ashlyn, and you also get a link to the Discord server that way. Of course, you don't have to throw in anything financially, but if you can, that helps with the production and hosting costs of this very program that you've been listening to. Once again, gotta thank our guest, Geoffrey Golden, the narrative designer of the podcast. It's right, you didn't know this. He set up the whole thing.
It's true. I set up the system, the narrative systems that underlie the podcast structure.
We each had dialogue trees.
Yes. Yeah, they were impressive too. They used to this podcast was 3 times the length of a feature film in terms of all the choices, the branching that you could do. So it was very impressive.
Yeah. Worth more than 3 movies. This podcast.
That's right.
You can use that in your review.
Whoa. I got to thank Smoovies for the edit. He's the one who puts it all together. I guess he would be... what is that video game wise? An editor? Because there's a movie editor. But
is there a sound designer?
Just the sound? Yeah. I guess that's what we'll do that. He's the sound designer.
Great.
Yeah. And of course, like always, I gotta thank Bo. I gotta thank Grant. Because together, we are the 3 Sonmigos. That didn't work. But that was a dialogue choice that probably I should have been left on the cutting room floor, but I accidentally read it. What have I done?
Dear God, what have you done?
I liked it.
Oh, okay.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, we all liked it. Thank you, David. And thank you, everybody. Goodbye.